I was 60 when I met him. 60. A number that felt heavy, weighted with decades of routine, obligations, and quiet resignation. Retirement had arrived slowly, like a tide creeping across the shore, bringing with it mornings that stretched long and evenings filled with the hum of empty rooms. My children were grown, scattered across the country, and my wife had passed years earlier, leaving behind memories that were both comforting and painfully empty. I had resigned myself to a life measured by routines. Quiet walks, and the occasional phone call from someone who still remembered to ask how I was. And then, unexpectedly, he appeared. His name was Marco. He wasn't a colleague, a neighbor, or someone I'd known through family. He was a man of my age, with a shock of silver hair, a mischievous glint in his eyes, and a laugh that seemed to fill the air with sunlight. We met at the local cafe, a modest place with worn leather chairs, a faint smell of roasted coffee beans, and a persistent draft near the door. I had been sitting alone, nursing a lukewarm cup of espresso, when he slid into the chair opposite me without asking, smiling as if we were old friends reunited. "Mind if I join?" he asked, voice rich and warm, carrying a confidence that immediately put me at ease. I nodded, slightly surprised but intrigued. "Sure," I replied. "I don't think I've seen you here before." "First time," he said. "But I have a feeling it won't be the last." That day, we talked for hours. Not about anything profound or earth-shattering, but about simple pleasures, football, racing, old movies, and the quiet absurdities of life at 60. There was no pretension, no performance, just conversation, laughter, and the kind of effortless understanding that takes years to build. By the time we parted, I felt an unfamiliar lightness in my chest, as if a window I hadn't realized was closed had been flung open. The following week, our meetings became routine. Every Tuesday morning, we sat at the same cafe, discussing football matches, debating tactics, and sharing memories of teams we had loved in our youth. I discovered he was an avid horse racing fan, a passion I had never explored, and soon he had convinced me to join him at the racetrack one sunny Saturday. I remember the first time we placed a bet together. Marco leaned over the form, pointing to a horse with a name that seemed ridiculous to me, and whispered, "Trust me, this one's got spirit." I hesitated, chuckling at the absurdity, but agreed. The race began. And as we watched the horses gallop, something shifted inside me. The thrill, the anticipation, the shared excitement, it felt like the world had grown younger around me. That day, we won a modest sum, enough to buy celebratory coffee and pastries, and as we laughed over our small victory, I realized I had never felt this kind of camaraderie before. Week after week, we explored more adventures. Football matches at the stadium became ritual, frayed scarves, chanting fans, and the exhilaration of being part of something larger than ourselves. Marco had a knack for finding humor in every detail, pointing out absurd behaviors of rival fans, and teasing me mercilessly when my predictions failed. I, in turn, began to anticipate our outings, looking forward to the shared joy, the laughter, and the unexpected energy he brought into my life. And then came the idea of the cabriolet. Marco had been talking about it for months, a playful dream he insisted we could realize. "Why not?" he said one morning, over cappuccinos and freshly baked croissants. "We're alive, aren't we? Let's drive, laugh, and feel the wind on our faces before anyone tells us it's too late." I laughed, dismissing it at first as idle chatter. But the next week, he arrived at my door with the keys to a sleek, red cabriolet. The engine purred like a living thing as we drove along winding country roads, wind whipping through our silver hair, the sun warm on our faces. We sang along to old songs, shouted our predictions about the passing landscape, and reveled in the absurdity of two men in their 60s stealing freedom from the confines of age and expectation. That summer, we became inseparable. Cafe mornings, racetrack bets, football matches, road trips in the cabriolet. The pattern was consistent, joyful, reckless even, and yet grounded in a deep trust. I had discovered a friendship that went beyond nostalgia, beyond companionship, beyond mere distraction. This was connection in its purest form, laughter, loyalty, and the shared exhilaration of a life rediscovered. But as our bond deepened, I realized it carried weight I hadn't anticipated. With every adventure, every risk, and every triumph, I began to confront truths about myself, the loneliness I had tolerated, the dreams I had shelved, the excitement I had forsaken for comfort and routine. Marco's presence was both gift and challenge, a mirror reflecting what I had lost and what I could still embrace. One evening, after a particularly exhilarating horse race where we had won more than ever before, we sat in the cabriolet, parked by a quiet lakeside. The sun dipped low, painting the water gold, and for the first time, I allowed myself to articulate the depth of my gratitude. "You know," I said quietly, "I never imagined life could surprise me like this at 60. I never thought I'd have a friend like you, ever. You've changed everything." He smiled, that mischievous glint never leaving his eyes. "And I never imagined I'd find a friend like you. Someone who's willing to take the ride with me, through racetracks, football, cabriolets, and whatever comes next. We're proof that it's never too late, aren't we?" I nodded, a lump in my throat. Proof indeed. Proof that age was no barrier, proof that life could still unfold in unexpected, joyful ways. And as the night fell, stars reflecting in the water, I felt a clarity I had not known for decades. Friendship, real friendship, could transform even the quietest, most ordinary life into something extraordinary. But that was only the beginning. The weeks turned into months, and our routine became ritualized. Predictable yet thrilling. Tuesdays at the cafe, Saturdays at the racetrack, evenings spent analyzing football statistics, and endless discussions about the next cabriolet trip, all of it formed a rhythm I had not known in decades. I was living in a space I had thought closed off, rediscovering the pulse of life through laughter, risk, and companionship. Marco had a method to his madness. He loved horse racing, and he loved the thrill of betting, but he was careful, meticulous even. "It's not about the money," he insisted one afternoon as we studied the racing forms over espresso. "It's about understanding the horses, the odds, the patterns. Discipline. Observation. And, of course, intuition." I tried to follow his lead, absorbing every nuance he pointed out. We analyzed jockey performance, track conditions, horse lineage, and recent wins. My notebook became filled with scribbles, charts, and calculations, and slowly, I began to understand the rhythm of racing in a way I never expected. When we won, even small amounts, the exhilaration was not just financial but deeply personal, a sense of accomplishment, a bond strengthened by shared strategy and triumph. Yet, not every day was victorious. We argued sometimes, usually over bets that went wrong or predictions that failed spectacularly. Marco could be stubborn, insisting on his intuition over my logic, and I, for the first time in years, found myself in genuine conflict with someone I respected deeply. One particular Saturday, a horse I had dismissed won against all odds, and I had to admit, grudgingly, that his instincts were often right. "You see?" he said, smiling triumphantly, ruffling his hair like a schoolboy. "It's not just luck. There's a rhythm to this, a pattern. You've got to feel it, James." I felt it, I muttered, shaking my head with a wry smile, and I still got it wrong. Our laughter that day was rich and freeing, and I realized that these conflicts, these small disagreements, were not damaging. They were part of the texture of our friendship, layers that made it feel real, resilient, and alive. I had never known someone with whom I could both argue and trust completely, someone who could challenge me and yet always respect the boundaries of my experience. Summer arrived, and with it came the cabriolet trips we had long dreamed about. Marco had rented a convertible, top down, a soft breeze accompanying our laughter as we drove through winding country roads. Sometimes we stopped at roadside diners. Sometimes at small football fields where local teams practiced, and sometimes simply to watch the sunset in silence. Those moments of quiet reflection became just as important as the loud, boisterous ones, teaching me the subtle beauty of presence, attention, and shared silence. One evening, after a particularly successful week of bets, Marco surprised me. "I've booked a weekend away," he announced, eyes sparkling. Just you and me. No schedules, no obligations, no distractions. We'll follow the races, the sun, and our instincts. Are you in? I hesitated only briefly. At my age, opportunities like this were rare, and the prospect of adventure was intoxicating. Absolutely, I said, feeling a thrill I hadn't known in decades. The weekend was everything I had hoped for. We drove along coastal highways, cabriolet top down, the wind tugging at our hair, laughing at our own antics, and daring each other to try increasingly ridiculous bets at small, local racetracks. We celebrated victories with dinners at tiny seaside cafes, toasting to the absurdity of our luck and the joy of living on the edge, even at 65. Yet, amid all this joy, I became aware of a subtle, persistent fear, the fear of losing this friendship, of growing too reliant on this exhilaration, or worse, of realizing that life, inevitably, would impose limits. Marco, I realized, had become a mirror, reflecting both the vitality I had forgotten and the fragility I had ignored. One night, after a particularly long drive along a moonlit highway, we stopped at a quiet overlook, the city lights shimmering like a distant galaxy. I turned to him, the weight of gratitude and vulnerability pressing in on me. Marco, I said softly, I never thought it could be like this. You've brought life into my life that I thought was long gone. I don't know what I would do without you. He smiled, leaning back against the car, eyes reflecting the silver of the city lights. And I never imagined I'd find someone to share it with at this age. Someone who understands the thrill, the absurdity, and the calm that comes after. Friendship is strange, isn't it? Sometimes it sneaks in when you least expect it and changes everything. We sat in silence for a while, neither of us needing to speak. I felt a profound sense of contentment and trust, the kind that can only be built over shared experiences, honesty, and the courage to embrace joy at any age. But even in this happiness, life reminded me of its unpredictability. One afternoon, a betting tip I had been confident in fell apart spectacularly, costing us more than we expected. Marco looked at me, a mix of frustration and amusement in his eyes. Well, that's life, he said, shrugging. It's not about never losing. It's about how you handle it. And we handle it together, don't we? I laughed, feeling the tension ease. Together, I agreed. That day, as we drove the cabriolet home with the top down, I realized something important. True friendship, even late in life, is not about avoiding risk, failure, or disappointment. It's about shared experience, trust, laughter, and the courage to live fully, no matter the age. By 65, I had discovered something I had never known in decades of living: the power of a friendship that could challenge, excite, comfort, and inspire. Marco was not just a companion, he was a reflection of life itself, reminding me that adventure, joy, and connection are never bound by age. And as we parked the cabriolet that evening, tired but exhilarated, I felt a quiet certainty settle in my chest: life, even in its later stages, could surprise you, delight you, and teach you that it's never too late to find a friend who makes the world feel wide, bright, and utterly alive. What happened next changed everything. Autumn arrived with a crisp edge, and our adventures continued, though life, as it always does, began to test the limits of our joy. The cabriolet rides became less frequent, the racetracks busier, and the stakes subtly higher. Marco had a habit of getting deeply involved in certain horses, certain bets, treating them almost as if they were personal matters, and I, cautious yet loyal, often followed, trusting his instincts more than my own. One Saturday, we traveled to a distant track, one that promised high rewards but carried equally high risks. The day was gray, rain threatening, and the crowd impatient. Marco was unusually tense, scanning the horses with intensity, murmuring calculations, statistics, and predictions under his breath. I noticed his jaw tight, his hands restless, a sign I had learned over months to read. "Marco, are you sure about this one?" I asked quietly, glancing at the odds. "It feels risky." He turned to me, eyes sharp, unwavering. "James, Everything worth doing carries risk. Trust me. We've handled worse together. I nodded, swallowing unease, placing the bet alongside him. The horses thundered down the track, hooves drumming like a heartbeat, and the one we had chosen surged ahead, only to falter at the last turn. We lost. Not a little, but a sum that stung sharply, a stark reminder that even the most careful planning could not guarantee success. Marco was silent for a long time afterward. His usual laughter absent, replaced with a furrowed brow and quiet frustration. I wanted to comfort him, to lighten the mood, but I realized some losses are internal, personal, and need to be processed in solitude. Yet, in that silence, I learned something important. Loyalty is not only about shared victories, but about standing together through disappointment. I placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling the weight of shared history, and said simply, "We'll get another chance. We always do." The weeks following were a mix of reflection and cautious optimism. We recalibrated our bets, analyzed past mistakes, and began to approach racing with a new, more deliberate mindset. I realized that part of the thrill of our friendship lay not just in the success, but in the negotiation of risk, in the learning, and in the unwavering trust we placed in each other despite setbacks. But life, inevitably, added another layer of complexity. Marco received news from his family, an illness that required him to spend long periods away from the city. For the first time, our routine fractured. Our cabriolet rides paused, the cafe meetings grew sporadic, and the familiar laughter was replaced with phone calls and distant updates. I felt the absence deeply, more than I expected. The house felt quieter, the streets lonelier, and the thrill of our adventures a memory that seemed almost fragile. During this period, I confronted something I had never allowed myself to admit, the fear of losing him, not just to circumstance but to the passage of time. I realized that at 65, friendships are precious, rare, and irreplaceable. And Marco was no longer just a companion. He had become a vital part of my life, a source of vitality, insight, and joy that I had thought lost forever. When he returned, we decided to reclaim our routine with renewed vigor. The cabriolet was rented once more, the racetrack visited with careful strategy, and football matches attended with enthusiasm undimmed by age. Yet, the stakes, emotional, financial, and physical, were higher. Our laughter now carried echoes of the anxiety and uncertainty we had endured, but also a deeper appreciation for the fleeting brilliance of shared moments. One evening, after a particularly thrilling football match, we found ourselves parked at a quiet overlook, the city lights glimmering like distant constellations. Marco turned to me, eyes reflecting both mischief and vulnerability. "James," he said softly, "I don't know what I'd do without this. Without you. I think," he paused, a rare falter in his usual confidence, "I'd be lost." I felt a lump rise in my throat. "You're not lost," I said, gripping his hand. "We found something rare. Something that doesn't depend on luck, horses, or football. It depends on us." We sat in silence for a long while, the cabriolet's engine ticking softly as it cooled, the wind carrying whispers of the season, and I understood fully, friendship, even late in life, carries lessons that no book, no experience, no solitary reflection can teach. It teaches resilience, courage, and the simple truth that joy is as much about presence and attention as it is about triumph and excitement. In the weeks that followed, we began planning a longer adventure, a road trip across the countryside, visiting racetracks and stadiums we had never explored. Every detail was meticulously plotted: the route, the hotels, the bets, the cafes, the music. It was reckless in ambition, yet deeply thoughtful in execution. I realized that even at 65, life could still surprise, thrill, and challenge us. One morning, as we packed the cabriolet, I reflected on the improbable trajectory of our friendship. From strangers at a cafe to inseparable companions navigating the thrills and trials of late adulthood, we had built something extraordinary. A bond that was playful yet profound, reckless yet anchored in trust, and joyous yet tempered by wisdom. As we drove away, the wind tugging at our hair, the road stretching endlessly ahead, I felt a clarity that had eluded me for decades, life, even in its later stages, is not diminished by age. It is enriched by openness, courage, and the willingness to embrace risk, joy, and connection with someone who makes the ordinary feel extraordinary. And as the cabriolet roared along winding country roads, Marco's laughter mingling with mine, I realized something essential. It is never too late to discover a friend, to reclaim a sense of adventure, or to find in someone else the spark that reignites your own life. But the best part, I knew, was still to come. Winter settled in with a quiet, contemplative hush. The cabriolet rides had given way to warm cafes and the comfort of routine, yet the adventures we had shared, every racetrack, every football match, every wind-whipped highway, lingered vividly in my mind, etched like golden ink on the pages of memory. Marco and I met as often as possible, our conversations now deeper, reflective, and tinged with the quiet awareness of mortality that comes with age. We talked about everything: past regrets, missed opportunities, fleeting joys, and the strange beauty of life after 60. Marco, ever the observer, had a way of asking questions that made me reflect on truths I had never fully acknowledged. "Do you think we ever really know what we want, James?" he asked one afternoon, eyes thoughtful, coffee steaming between his fingers. "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe not. But I know what I value. And I value this, us. These moments. This friendship. It has changed me." He smiled, that mischievous glint softened by time and experience. "It's remarkable, isn't it? To find someone who understands you without pretense, who challenges you without judgment, who shares joy and risk as if they were sacred. I never thought it would happen at this stage in life." We reminisced about our most reckless adventures, the cabriolet rides along coastal highways, the improbable wins at the racetrack, the heated debates over football predictions, and the quiet evenings sitting by the lake, simply watching the sun set. Each memory carried laughter, sometimes frustration, sometimes quiet awe at the beauty of shared experience. One evening, as snow gently fell outside the window of our favorite cafe, I realized the truth I had been carrying quietly for months: friendship at this stage in life is not merely companionship. It is a revelation. It is a chance to reclaim vitality, to confront fears, and to embrace life fully, knowing that every day is both precious and finite. Marco had given me something I never expected: a mirror to my own courage, joy, and resilience. We decided to take one final adventure before the winter fully settled, a trip to the countryside, retracing some of the roads we had driven in the cabriolet, visiting racetracks we had missed, and spending quiet nights in small inns where conversation and laughter could flow freely. The planning was meticulous, a blend of spontaneity and careful preparation, and the excitement was almost intoxicating. The drive itself was euphoric. The cabriolet, top down despite the crisp winter air, roared along winding roads, snowflakes occasionally kissing our faces, the engine humming a lively rhythm beneath us. We laughed, shouted, sang along to old songs, and reveled in the absurdity of two men in their 60s defying the expected boundaries of age. We reached a small village nestled between hills, the streets quiet and the air fragrant with wood smoke. That evening, we found ourselves sitting on a bench overlooking a frozen river, the water reflecting the pale light of the setting sun. Silence fell comfortably between us, heavy with understanding and contentment. "James," Marco said softly, breaking the quiet, "do you ever think about what comes next? About life without these moments?" I considered the question carefully. "I do," I replied. "But I've realized that the next isn't as important as the now. This, our friendship, these experiences, it's what matters. We can't cling to the future or regret the past. We can only live fully in what we have, and I intend to do that." He nodded, a rare seriousness settling over his features. "I feel the same. You've changed my life, James. I can't imagine these years without you." And in that moment, I felt a profound sense of equilibrium. Life had surprised me, thrilled me, tested me, and ultimately revealed a truth I had long forgotten: that connection, laughter, courage, and shared experience are the true treasures of existence. Not money, not accolades, not social standing, but the quiet, enduring bonds that allow us to face the inevitable with dignity, joy, and grace. As winter deepened, we continued our adventures, though at a slower pace, savoring each moment. Our bets became lighter, our drives shorter, our football matches attended with warm scarves and thermoses of coffee. Yet the exhilaration remained, the thrill of shared victories, the comfort of shared silence, the delight in each other's company. By the time I turned 66, I understood fully what I had gained, not just a friend, but a partner in life's unpredictable journey. Marco had entered my world when I had thought the doors of adventure were closed, and together, we had rewritten the expectations of late life. And in this realization, I found peace, not loud, not triumphant, but quiet, deliberate, and enduring. The laughter, the arguments, the bets, the cabriolet rides, and the quiet nights by the lake, all of it had shaped me, enriched me, and reminded me that life, at any age, holds the possibility of wonder, connection, and joy. The moral was clear: it is never too late to find a friend, never too late to embrace adventure, and never too late to rediscover the vitality and excitement of life. Age is not a limitation, but a lens, revealing more deeply the beauty of trust, loyalty, and the human capacity for joy. As snow fell softly outside my window that evening, I sipped my coffee and reflected on the improbable, extraordinary path that had led me here. And I knew this truth with certainty: life is immeasurably richer when shared, and the friendships we cultivate, even late in life, can transform the ordinary into something truly extraordinary. Marco raised his cup in a quiet toast, and I met him with a smile, the warmth of shared history and enduring connection settling like a gentle fire in my chest. Together, we had discovered that the heart, regardless of age, can still thrill, hope, and rejoice. And that knowledge, above all, is the most profound gift of all.